Hello, my name is Cadet Jack Leonard. I'm the Academics Officer for Company I2, and this presentation is going over how West Point grades, evaluates, and awards cadets. So first I'm going to cover why it's important to understand this information. And one might fairly say, well, I don't need to understand all this stuff. I can just do my best wherever I go, and the evaluation will do what it does. But I think it is important to understand how these systems work for a number of reasons. One, this is how leadership communicates its priorities to you. Those who have come before us have created these systems and weighted certain things by certain priorities, knowing that if we put our time and effort into some places more than others, it'll prepare us better for our futures. So the best way to respond to that is to understand how these systems work, and then orient our life and our time and our effort accordingly. Next is a general principle. If you want to do your best, which we should all want to do our best, it's important to know how you're evaluated. And as a very practical means, these matrices are used for a number of things. For example, posting, grad school, scholarships, branching, MyAd and IAD selection, leadership position selection, semester abroad selection, and honors and awards. And so if any of these things are important to you, then hopefully understanding what it's going to take to get there is important as well. Okay, so next I'm going to be covering the difference between the two matrices, two grade matrices at West Point, the CQPA and the CPS. These are similar, but they are different, and a lot of people get them mixed up, and that's okay. Hopefully this can clarify. So the CPS is the cadet performance score, whereas the CQPA is the cadet quality point average. So CPS, cadet performance score, is what generates our class rank. It is calculated with every grade from all three pillars, with 55% academic, 30% military, and 15% physical. This is especially useful now for post night. Whenever you select your post, it is in direct concordance with your class rank. If you want to post somewhere really nice that it takes a competitive class rank to get, the higher the better. This is different from the cadet quality point average. So what goes into the CQPA is everything that's a class, and it's weighted by how many credit hours that class is worth. This is usually what people call our GPA, but it is different from the academic pillar specifically. So military science classes go into it, DPE classes go into it, and of course academic classes go into it. So this matrix ends up being about 90% academics. And the military science and DPE classes are less heavily weighted here. Most DPE classes are 0.5 or 1.5 credit hours, and the military science classes are 1.5 credit hours each, whereas the academic credit hours are 3 credit hours to a class, except in some cases it's even more, 4 or 4.5. Whenever we go to apply for graduate school, this is what we're going to be using as our GPA. Whenever you go and print your transcript, this is what shows up as the GPA for graduate school admissions, and you can see it right there on the front page of CIS. So in the cases, now not every grade goes into the CQPA. There's a lot of physical pillar and military pillar grades that are not classes that have no credit hours. For example, the IOCT has no credit hours, and the our leadership detail, it has no credit hours associated. And with the military science classes and the DPE classes that do have credit hours, it's weighted differently towards the CQPA than it is towards the CPS. And I'll cover that in more detail on the next slide. Okay, so this slide hopefully will help clarify some of the differences between how the CQPA is calculated and how the CPS is calculated. So starting with a basic schedule, this is my schedule this semester. I have 20 credit hours. I have 6 academic classes and 2 DPE classes. All 6 of my classes are philosophy classes, and philosophy is the best major at the academy for anybody, in case anybody was wondering. So this is what really confuses people. These classes like MS 100 or 200 or a typical DPE course. Okay, so and I'll go bullet by bullet with these 4 examples here. So MS 100 or 200 Whenever you look at your schedule, you see that it's 1.5 credit hours. And you might think and reasonably conclude, okay, well, an academic class is typically worth 3 credit hours, and this class is worth 1.5 credit hours. Therefore, I'm going to put half as much effort into this one because it's half the weight as a 3 credit hour course. And that's true towards the CQPA, towards the GPA. But towards CPS, towards our class rank, that's not true at all, because the military pillar is not calculated by credit hours. MS 100 and 200 are worth 5% of the military pillar. And whenever you, and I'll show the chart later, but whenever you run an analysis of how that class compares to a 3 credit hour academic class, it's worth 116% as much. So what you're putting half of your effort towards, and I know many people who do this, it's actually more heavily weighted, not less. Okay, so a similar phenomenon with the regular DPE class. People think, oh, it's only worth 0.5 credit hours. That's 1/6 as much as a 3 credit hour course. I don't really need to put any effort towards that at all. I can drop that and be just fine. Well, a regular DPE course is worth 7% of the physical pillar. And whenever you run an analysis, ends up being worth 84% of a typical 3 credit hour academic class towards the CPS. So the big takeaway is just remembering, when it comes to class rank, the physical pillar and the military pillar are not calculated by credit hours. That only works towards the CQPA, and the only pillar that's calculated by credit hours is the academic pillar. And this becomes especially apparent when we talk about some of the grades that are worth 0 credit hours, but are still very important towards class rank. For example, the IOCT, 0 credit hours, but it's worth 10% of the physical pillar, and that's equivalent to 116% of a 3 credit hour academic class. Or the most heavily weighted grade in all of West Point is the leadership detail. It's worth 0 credit hours, but it's worth 15% of the military pillar. The military pillar is worth 30% of the CPS, and so that ends up being equivalent to 349% of a 3 credit hour academic class. All right, so next to go over the academic pillar. The academic pillar is by far the most straightforward, and hopefully is something that we're all very familiar with. It's also easiest to calculate how you're doing because on the academic summary tab of CIS, it does all of those breakdowns for you. You can see your GPA by semester and compare the difference between your academic only performance and your CQPA. Okay, so the most heavily weighted ones are the plebe year math classes, the ones that meet every day. Those are worth 4.5 credit hours each. And then the major sciences and the languages are worth 4 credit hours. And the rest is just filled out by 3 credit hour classes. You'll see that I have the percentages listed here. This is going to vary a little bit depending on how your schedule differs from the base model of 40 total academic classes at West Point, 8 semesters of 5 classes. I know mine is up around 44 classes at this point because of STAP and taking 6 classes in a semester sometimes. So this is going to vary a little bit, but these percentages are accurate for a base model of 40. Also, if you go semester abroad, then you would have to reduce it by 5, typically reduce it by 5 because of those classes that you go abroad. And to represent the academic pillar, I have a picture of our beloved Dean, Brigadier General Jeb, and then also some of the top scholars at West Point, some very impressive individuals. Our 2 Rhodes Scholars this year, and my fellow philosophy major, Langdon Ogburn, who won the Marshall Scholar this year. Okay, so next I'm going to cover the military pillar, which is worth 30% of the CPS. That's 30% of our class rank. For that, here's the weighting chart, and you can see that starting with MS 100 and 200, those are worth 5% each. MS 300 and MX 400 are worth 7.5%. Then we get into the academic year MD grades, which gets heavier as it goes along. So there's a high incentive to do your best as a leader in the company. There's a big jump from yuck year to cow year, from 3% to 7.5%. And then the summers, there's 2 grades for Buckner, an MD grade and an ML grade. The ML grade is the one with your objective evaluation, things like shooting, land nav, how well you operate a radio, things of that nature, whereas your MD grade was how your leadership evaluated you. CLDT, the grade there is pretty similar to the Buckner ML grade, except you can see how heavily weighted it is. It's 10% of the military pillar. And then your leader detail is very heavily weighted, 15%. And if you want to keep track of how you're doing in your military pillar, this is taken straight from the Excel sheet that I'm sending out in addition to this video. And you can enter your grade that the number grade that you get that corresponds with the grade that you earned. So a 4.33 is an A+, a 4 is an A 3.67 is an A-, and on down. In this sheet, we'll calculate it using the WS, which is the weighted score, and it'll tell you your military pillar GPA at the bottom. Okay, so similar to the military pillar is the physical pillar. Again, the military and physical pillar don't operate on a credit hour system. They operate according to how heavily they're weighted, just by percentage. So the typical class, mill move, boxing, survival swim, and combatives, those are each worth 7%. And the lifetime sport classes are worth only 4%, so a little bit less. And the classes that are in the classroom classes are worth a little bit more. Those are PE 215 and PE 450. The grades that are very small, not very heavily weighted, are the sports grade. So whether you're doing company athletics, my favorite is company ultimate frisbee, or a club team, or your core squad sport, everybody's getting the same grade, which is only 2.5% of the physical pillar every semester. And then finally, the IOCTs. The IOCTs are very heavily weighted. Those are worth 10% of the physical pillar each year. Yuck year, cow year, and first year, all worth 10%. And again, you can use this exact calculator in the Excel sheet that I'm sending out in addition to the video. So where the analysis gets fun is when we see how heavily weighted these events are in comparison to each other. So we can take everything that goes into our CPS and rank order it top to bottom. And whenever you look at this chart, I at least think, wow, we get a ton of grades here at West Point. And here it is. You can see that the most heavily weighted things are the highly weighted military grades. And you can see that the second highest weighted one is MX400. I have the chart color-coded with red being academic grades, green being military grades, and blue being physical grades. But MX400 is interesting because it's worth both 7.5% of the military grade and a 3 credit hour academic class. So because it gets 2 grades, it ends up being one of the most heavily weighted events in all of West Point, the second most. The next, and all of this information is going to depend on your personal situation. If you were a turnback, then this is going to be a little bit different. If you did summer classes, it's going to be different. If you did semester abroad, it's going to be different. But all of this just assumes, it assumes that the most basic West Point cadet career. And you can I would definitely just pause the video at this point or take a look at the Excel sheet that I'm sending out and go over this. Because a lot of people aren't familiar with how heavily weighted these events are by each other. And for a little bit of a visual, this is the same information that was on the last slide. It just shows all the events in a bar graph form. So we can see up here the heavily weighted military events, here in the middle the academic classes, and then here at the end things like your underclassmen MD grades and your sports. Okay, so next covering some of the fun stuff, honors and awards. New to this year, West Point has a Latin honors graduation system. So those that are top 5% in the class by CPS will be summa cum laude, 6 to 20% magna cum laude, and 21 to 35% cum laude. The developer of this system is Major Terry, one of my former instructors and one of the best instructors I've ever had in BSNL. Covering some of the awards that we can earn, and of course I had to put up a picture of our beloved XO, Cadet Justin Gittemeyer, and a great friend of mine, who is currently on track to be the West Point valedictorian, an incredible accomplishment. He's the #1 in the class. So 4 of the awards that we can earn, one is the Dean Star, and that means that that person had a 3.67, at least a 3.67 CQPA for the year or cumulative. The wreath means, so the wreath and the wreath star use a different matrix called the Cadet Award Score. And that's a matrix used when you take all 3 pillars and weight them equally, so 33.3% each. The top 15% by that matrix earns the wreath, and the top 5% by that matrix earns the wreath plus the star, or the star with the wreath wrapped around it. And then next, there's also the Master of the Sword Award, the one that looks the coolest. That's a physical pillar only score. And the biggest barrier there is that you have to earn a 3.67 for the year, and there's additional requirements as well. So to offer a few tips for success from a firstie who's about to graduate but is by no means an expert, a few things that work well for everybody. And if you follow these, anybody can be successful at West Point. I think it starts with setting high goals, being ambitious, asking yourself, where do I want to be in 5 years from now? What's the future hold for me? What future do I want to build for myself? What life do I want to build for myself? And really visualizing that, and then coming back to your semesters, your months, your weeks, your days, and organizing your schedule and your time so that you can achieve them, so that you can get to those places. Bringing up the scholarship winners, the Marshall Scholars, the Rhodes Scholars, Justin, who's about to be the valedictorian. They didn't get there overnight, and we all know that. But they set those goals probably way back plebe year and have optimized their whole lives so that they can achieve them. It's very impressive, and that's something that we can all learn from and do. Having healthy routines is incredibly important. Getting good sleep, that's the biggest one for cadets. It's impressive, and it takes an insane amount of willpower to pull an all-nighter or to stay up really late working on some big assignments. But man, getting good sleep is very important, so try to work throughout the day so that you can sleep at night. And then nutrition, exercise, caffeine use, things like that all go into being healthy and having healthy routines. So for some academics specific tips, the biggest thing when it comes to your papers and projects is starting early. Everybody wants to procrastinate, and you hear this advice constantly, and it's because people don't follow it. It's because we still like to procrastinate and put things off to the last second possible. But another benefit of starting early on your papers and your projects is that you can go in and schedule meetings with some fantastic faculty. I'm taking 6 philosophy classes right now, and all 6 of my instructors have a PhD in their field. They're all experts in their field. And they're all accessible enough that I can start a paper early, do my best on that paper, and then schedule a meeting with them, and they'll sit down with me one-on-one to critique my paper so that when I turn it in for the final grade, it'll be a better grade. And that kind of helpfulness and accessibility from true experts in the field is not something to be taken for granted. It's not something that most civilian colleges have, and it's definitely something that we should use. And it's something that the instructors enjoy doing as well, from my experience. So doing well on the WPRs, doing well on the tests and the Ts, I think one tip that's been huge for me is just realizing that what's going to be on that WPR or the T is usually just the summary of what you learned from the class. So the best time to summarize what you learned in class is as soon after class as you can manage time for, usually sometime that evening while it's fresh on your mind. So after the class, while it's fresh on your mind, write a little summary of what you learned to yourself so that you can build that study guide as you go along and perform well come test day. Next, I think it's helpful to front load your semesters. So at the beginning of every semester, every class is going to send you a full schedule and a full grade matrix. You can look at it, and usually you'll see that the biggest grades come at the end. So that just means you're going to get busier throughout your semester as you go along. Therefore, you can find some things, some of those major graded events, and push them to the beginning of your semester when given the option to. It'll be very helpful because you're saving time, saving yourself time whenever it comes to crunch time. Next, learning from others' routines and habits. You probably can look around to your left and right and see people with terrible routines and see people with great routines and habits and lifestyles. And so it's very, and I think that usually people know, get that feeling whenever you see people making good decisions and bad decisions. You can usually identify that and be able to learn from it. Next, I think having a love of learning, having optimism and a positive attitude cannot be understated. There's value in everything that we learn here. Really and truly, I really believe that. And if you take the time to realize why it's valuable for you to know this information, then it won't be as stressful, and you'll forget that you're doing work, and you'll forget that you had to use a lot of self-discipline to get yourself going on it. You'll just enjoy learning about it. And I think that that's very true, and it takes the stress off things, and hey, sometimes classes can even be fun. And it's especially fun when you build strong relationships with those around you. I mean, everything that we do here, in all three pillars, you're constantly interacting with folks, your company mates, your roommates, your classmates, your instructors, your tax. Always build strong relationships. Nobody gets anywhere. Nobody that's successful achieved that success on their own. So it's very good to build strong relationships and seek help when needed. And then lastly, whenever you've followed these tips, hopefully you've achieved your goals, you've gotten to the places that you want to be. Always take the time to look back behind you and see those who are coming up behind you, and then to reach a hand back and help them out whenever you get the chance, especially if somebody reaches out. I think it should be an absolute priority to help those following in your footsteps who are looking up to you. Well, I hope that this presentation has been helpful for you to understand the complexities of the West Point evaluation and assessment systems. If you have any questions about the material, don't hesitate to reach out to my email address or phone number listed there on the slide. And this information is going to be in these slides, which I'm sending out, the Excel sheet that I'm sending out, and our terrific PAO team also printed out 2 poster boards with a lot of this information on it for display in the collab room that you can go and check out anytime. And on that note, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.